The afternoon sun worsened the pain in Leo's joints. He lay curled on the ground, writhing from the pain he felt while trying to get up. His knuckles shook, and he almost concluded that both his wrists would never function as usual ever again. He winced as Chloe, his sister, tried to help him up. He pushed her hands away and lifted himself off the ground with one last push, summoning the strength left in him. The moment he stood by himself, his head spun, and his eyes rolled with their sockets. If Chloe didn't hold him so fast, he would have fallen again. But still, he pushed her away and steadied himself. It had been a while, and he thought all the fighting couldn't happen again. He hoped that what little skills he used the last time were enough to put an end to it. But here he was, barely 2 weeks since the previous. He wished his mother would heed his cries and register him for a judo or taekwondo class. Yet he knew his mother would stick to her decision not to get him registered. His constant involvement in fights played a crucial role in his mother's defiance, too. The dizziness wore off, and Leo frowned at Chloe. No matter how hard he thought about it or tried not to blame his sister, she occupied the position of the original perpetrator. Even if she wasn't, he did it to keep her safe from all the fights he ever fought. And for her safety, or so Chloe claimed when she told him to hide the truth from their mother. He could never tell their mother what was wrong. Leo picked up his backpack from where it was thrown and gathered its scattered contents all over the ground. Chloe joined the pickup session, and he didn't stop. His anger allowed her to do that much. He wondered if he could tell his mother to register Chloe instead of himself for self-defense classes. But he had no reason to convince her to listen to him. He dismissed the thought as soon as it came. When his bag was back in order, without words, shaking only his head, he beckoned to Chloe to follow him. She nodded and followed him to the parking lot. They continued the journey in silence until their mother arrived in her car a few minutes later. Leo thought of asking her to pick them up from school earlier than she did. If only she had done it. Many things could have been avoided, but he understood that she couldn't leave her workplace earlier than scheduled. Another argument episode ensued as soon as they joined their mother in the car. An argument that started and ended with his bruises. His mother hated to see so much as a scratch or wound on either of her children. But Leo managed to secure many scars and never had a valid reason. Nothing other than he got into a fight. His mother shouted at him and stayed pissed or angry. Sometimes she scolded him. Other times, she uttered no word and gave him the cold shoulder for the rest of the day. In the end, Chloe acts like an angel and pleads with their mother to forgive him. In the worst of times, he was grounded. Somehow, Leo saw that coming. He could tell from the anger in her eyes when she looked at his broken lips. No thanks to the bad day he knew she must have encountered at work. She didn't say a word as she drove home. The time of silence allowed Leo to wonder when his mother would get tired of reprimanding him. Not that he wanted her to, but he wanted her to pay closer attention, realize that he didn't do things for attention, and understand that the right questions or probing the right person would produce the correct answer. He wished for her to divulge all attentiveness towards them. He imagined her reaction when she discovered that the person who got into fights was Chloe, not himself, when she figured out that he was only a sacrificial lamb, where the saving of Chloe was significant. How would she react when she came to terms with the fact that her only daughter was a victim of bullies? His thoughts quickly came to an end when they arrived home. He pushed himself out of the car and refused Chloe's offer to help him carry his bag. His mother's silence remained when they got into the house. She didn't say as much as a word or ask how he sustained each wound, as she had asked in the past. Instead, she got the first aid box, treated his wounds, and disappeared into the kitchen to prepare lunch. Concluding that his mother was choosing the silent treatment, Leo vanished to his room. When he changed into different clothes and started playing a video game, he expected Chloe's presence. In a bit of time, as her custom dictated, she came to him after every fight. Leo supposed that she felt guilty about the day and their mom and wanted to cheer him up, but he wished that for once she didn't come running to check on him or apologize or play. Usually, she came with her dolls, asking him to help her style their hair, paint their face, or do some other ridiculous thing. She failed to recognize that he was her 10-year-old brother who had no interest in dolls or toys, who didn't want to play house with his 7-year-old sister, even if she thought of it as being friendly. But, much to his disappointment, she showed up in record 2 minutes after he started to play the video game. "Hey, Leo," she said with a thrill in her voice. Annoyance stirred up inside Leo, and he thought of various ways he could send her off without hurting her feelings. She showed up with a doll in both of her hands. "Want to play dress up?" Leo shrugged and continued playing his game, hoping his cold attitude would send his sister off. but it only piqued her interest the more. She rushed to meet him on the bed where he sat and shoved the doll in his face. "Let's dress her up. You know how to pick the best colors, Leo. Remember the last time? Or if you're not playing dress up, I can join your game." Chloe kept talking or babbling, whichever way, but Leo couldn't tell until his game went off before his eyes. He looked up in a rush, trying to figure out what caused a hitch or disrupted his progress, only to find the plug within his sister's fingers. She smiled at him, and he had the urge to hit her or slap her across the face. "What did you do that for?" he screamed at her instead, and she squirmed in tears. He hated to see her act that way. Often, he brushed it off as immaturity and tolerated the attitude, but he lacked the zeal that afternoon. He tried to clear his head with the video game, but his sister wanted to annoy him. He couldn't hide his irritation as he stood from the bed and pushed her out of his room with careful hands. His mother had taught him not to let his anger control his actions, and although he was angry, he knew it didn't justify his handling his sister anyhow. He shoved her out of the room and threw her toys after her. He slammed his door after ensuring nothing was wrong with the toys. He returned to his game and shouted back at Chloe not to show up in his room or ask him to play with her again. He should have known that his sister was not one to give up, because her knuckles rammed his door a few minutes later, demanding his presence. He ignored her, but he knew it was trouble when he heard his mother's voice. He dragged himself to the door and opened it. He glanced at his mother and caught a glimpse of her fuming eyes. "Why did you destroy your sister's doll?" she said, and Leo's head spun. He prepared his speech in his head to protest about not touching Chloe's hand when he looked at his mother's hands. She held the doll with so much pressure, Leo thought it would burst. However, what amazed him was not the pressure with which his mother had the doll, but rather the fact that she had the same beauty in two hands. Either that, or his eyes were deceiving him. His mother was no magician. Hence, only one explanation existed for what Leo saw. Someone removed the head of the doll and divided the toy into two equal parts. The head of the beauty was one part, and the rest of the body was the other. Leo could hardly believe his eyes, and he knew without being told that his sister was out to seek vengeance because he threw her out of his room. His word against his sister's. "I didn't do that," Leo said, pointing at his mother's hands and pleading with his eyes. "Do you mean to tell me the head of the doll came off itself? Try another lie." "But I'm being honest, Mom. I didn't cut the head off the doll. All I did was push Chloe out of my room when she unplugged my game and threw the dolls after her. I checked to be sure nothing happened to the dolls before I shut the door of my room." "You pushed your sister? That's it, Leo. You're grounded. No video games for the next 2 weeks. You need to stop being violent." "But I'm not violent, Mom. I told you she unplugged my video game in the middle of a battle." "That's not enough. Not a word more. I don't want to see you playing those games, and you will treat your sister better. She's not like those kids you get into fights with at school." "Of course she's not," Leo seethed, but his mother caught on. She would have asked him to explain his meaning and why he gave that type of answer, but they heard a thud behind them, and when they turned to see Chloe lay helpless on the floor, her arms scattered on the floor, and she didn't look like she was breathing. Fear clouded Leo's reasoning, making him the first to rush at Chloe. He shook her, but she didn't respond. He wondered what could have made his mother stand motionless for a couple of seconds, but it took some time before she gathered herself and came to Chloe too. She carried her on her shoulders and back at Leo to get her keys and phone from her room. Leo dashed off, obeying his mother's instructions, and still managed to pick up the keys and phone from her room and reach the car before she did. He unlocked the doors and opened the passenger door as his mother descended from the porch with Chloe in her hands. She still wasn't responding. His mother retrieved the key from his hands, rushed for the driver's seat, and brought the car engine to life. While she drove them to the family hospital, she asked Leo about their father. He did as instructed, and their father arrived at the hospital at the same time as they did. His workplace wasn't so far away. Quickly, they handed over Chloe to the emergency department. During the rush to the hospital, she seemed to have gained some consciousness, although she cried in pain. Leo had never felt more hopeless in his entire life. The first time he saw his sister cry with so much fervor from genuine pain was when he discovered the school bullies had turned on her as their victim. He wanted to clear them off, but he didn't possess the strength. He allowed himself to suffer for her. He wanted to do that much, but he couldn't. He could only watch. The doctors took her away for examination after his mom narrated what had happened before their arrival. She told the story again to their father as they waited for the doctor's feedback. After what seemed like a millennium, one of the nurses appeared and brought the three of them to a doctor's room. Chloe was in the same room. Her eyes seemed hollow in a couple of hours, and Leo wondered if a person could lose so much weight in such a short period. He also feared that if that wasn't the case, it meant she was encountering weight loss, and he didn't notice it until then. The doctor asked them to sit on the chairs available in the room. His mother went over to Chloe, cupped her face, and kissed her forehead. She was muttering something, although Leo wasn't sure. He thought he heard his mother say she was scared. She moved away from Chloe and sat down beside their father. Leo couldn't remember sitting like that in any hospital room before. They never visited hospitals. They were barely ever sick. The room was tense. The atmosphere tense. Leo didn't know what to expect. His parents' reaction after the doctor's report some moments later also showed that they were not prepared. He didn't know if their unpreparedness qualified as something to be joyful or sad over. But his mother's outburst made him no better. His little comprehension of the situation screamed enough to let Leo know something was wrong with Chloe. He didn't understand the doctor's diagnosis in the first place. But, as he explained, Leo understood better. His sister possessed a form of kidney problem, or better still, an issue that affected both her kidneys and made it difficult for proper digestion in her body. The doctor prescribed or suggested that they start with dialysis for Chloe, another thing that Leo's little brain couldn't comprehend. The doctor explained that dialysis involved a rigorous and painful, also expensive process by which waste products were removed from a non-functioning kidney. Leo's parents were silent and lost in thought at the outburst. When his father asked what else could be done, the doctor's answer showed that he had made the condition since he learned about Chloe's predicament. "She'll need a kidney transplant," the doctor said. Leo's father asked for the modalities, and the doctor was all too eager to explain that the transplant of body organs reigned on a waiting list. The list, the doctor explained, included many people who need a kidney transplant. However, the downside stemmed from the inconsistent and unpredictable availability of organs. Since these organs belonged to sensitive parts of the body, and since they performed crucial functions, it was either people who didn't find a match, or their match wasn't willing to donate. Leo watched his mother struggle with tears where she sat. His father, on the other hand, wore a great mask of patience on his face. "Can we donate?" he asked. "Can we give her one of our kidneys?" His mother also shook her head in agreement. The doctor explained that the process wasn't as easy as it sounded. They had to perform tests and make sure that they were a match for their daughter. Only then could they decide if they could transplant or not. The two grown-ups agreed to be tested, and they were taken away for their samples to be collected. Leo wanted to ask if he could be tested too, but his parents were too occupied in their sorrow to acknowledge him, or so he thought. Instead, he sat by Chloe in the waiting room, where she was waiting for her dialysis that day. He kept mute and stroked her hair at intervals. She smiled at him too. He wished she would speak like she was always doing. For those minutes with her, he missed her trouble. He missed the way she would shout at him and disturb every game. He missed the voice that called him to play house or dress up. He got so occupied in his thoughts that he didn't know he cried, not until his sister's fingers swept the tears off his cheek. "I'll be fine," she said as the nurse led her into the room. His parents soon joined him where he sat. They looked more gloomy than before, and he supposed they were not matches for Chloe. At that moment, he decided to speak up. "I'll donate mine," he whispered first, sitting close to his mother. She didn't hear him, but she asked him to repeat himself. "I said, I'll donate my kidney. I can't watch Chloe die, Mom. I'm scared. She's my sister. I ought to fight for her." "Will you, honey?" His mother cupped his face, and he nodded in her hands. "Yes, if I am a match." Indeed, he was a match. The doctor carried out the necessary tests on him, and his parents signed the agreement for the transplant. The transplant took place some days later. One of Leo's kidneys was given to his sister, who retained a healthy life free of disease that affected her kidney. He no longer fights with her. He has reported the bullies, and is now as strong as a backbone and bodyguard. His mother registered both siblings for self-defense classes. Although they don't have fights anymore, no one can confront them. Leo claims to be protecting his kidney, but the world knows that Leo is watching his sister because he loves her, even more than himself.